There's a very specific kind of person who buys a Corvette. And that person, almost without exception, believes they are not that kind of person. That's not an insult. It's actually the most interesting thing about America's sports car. The gap between who buys it and who they think they're buying it for. We're going to spend some time in that gap today. And by the end, you might recognize someone in there, maybe even yourself. Here's something worth holding on to as we go. The Corvette has always been two things at once. It's a genuine performance machine, and it's a costume. The fascinating part is figuring out which one matters more to the person writing the check and how reliably they get that wrong. Let's start somewhere unexpected. Not at the beginning and not at the end. Let's start in the middle of an identity crisis. The C5 arrived in 1997 like a man who had just survived a difficult decade and was determined to be taken seriously again. The Corvette had spent most of the 80s looking a little lost. Emissions, regulations, fuel crises, a cultural drift away from performance. The car had survived all of that, but barely with its dignity intact. The C4 had done its job. It kept the nameplate alive. But it had not exactly set pulses racing. Then the C5 showed up and changed the conversation entirely. The C5 buyer knew this history. That was part of the appeal. He wasn't just buying a sports car, he was buying a comeback story and casting himself as the protagonist. These were practical men in the broadest sense. Engineers, business owners, tradespeople who had done the math. The C5, even at launch, offered performance that embarrassed cars costing twice as much. That genuinely mattered to them. They liked the value. They liked being right. What they didn't fully admit was that the C5 represented something they'd been quietly waiting for. Permission to want something fast without feeling frivolous about it. It had the LS1 numbers on paper. It had a removable targa top. It had everything a practical man needed to convince himself this was a rational purchase. The spreadsheet checked out. The heart rate told a different story. Keep that idea in mind, the idea of rationalization. We're coming back to it. Now jump backward 30 years, to a car that required no rationalization whatsoever. Rationalization implies self-awareness, and the C3 Corvette buyer was operating almost entirely on pure feeling. The C3 ran from 1968 to 1982, which tells you something important right away. That is a very long time to sell the same basic shape, but the shape was working. Long hood, fastback tail, that unmistakable Coke bottle waist, it looked like something from a fever dream about America, and it was selling to exactly the kind of person who had that fever. The C3 era buyer was young, or at least young adjacent. He had watched Steve McQueen movies and taken them personally. He wore the Corvette like a statement of intent. The early C3S, the late 60s models with the big block options, attracted a buyer who was not especially concerned with subtlety. He was not commuting in it. He was announcing himself. The car was loud, theatrical, and unapologetic. So was he. Then something shifted. By the mid-70s, the horsepower numbers had collapsed under emissions pressure. A 1975 Corvette made around 165 horsepower. That is not a performance figure. That is a disappointment dressed up in a fiberglass body. The same car, now with a fraction of its former power, was being sold to a slightly different buyer. Someone who wanted the image but was getting considerably less of the substance, and yet they kept buying it. Happily, the shape was enough, the badge was enough. That's something worth sitting with when you start to wonder what a car actually sells. Because it turns out it's almost never the horsepower. This is also a good moment to circle back to something we said at the very beginning. The Corvette as costume. The C3 is where that idea gets its clearest, most honest expression. Because a 1975 Corvette with 165 horsepower is not, by any serious definition, a performance car. It is, however, a Corvette. And for the person buying it in 1975, that distinction was apparently invisible, or irrelevant, or both. Now fast forward. And also backward, depending on how you think about collector markets. Either way, we arrive at the car that started all of this in the most dangerous way possible. The 1963 to 1967 Stingray is, by most accounts, the most beautiful production Corvette ever made. That's not really a debatable position. The split-window coupe, the fastback profile, the design work that Zora, Arkus Duntov, and Bill Mitchell produced together, it was genuinely extraordinary for its era. It is still extraordinary now. Time has been very kind to it. The C2 buyer at the time was often younger than you might expect. This was an aspirational car in the truest sense, something people scraped together for, waited years for, made real sacrifices for. The C2 attracted buyers who had a very specific image of themselves that the car seemed to confirm. Not just successful, tasteful, specific. The person behind the wheel of a Stingray wasn't just fast, he was fast and right. There's a meaningful difference, at least in one's own mind. Today, the C2 has a different kind of buyer, and that person deserves his own paragraph. He is almost certainly over 50. He may have owned a C2 briefly in his 20s and sold it for reasons he still regrets at dinner parties. Or he's buying one now because it represents a cleaner, more vivid version of American life. A version that felt simpler and more certain. He's not wrong to feel that, but it's worth noticing that the car he's paying serious collector money for is largely the car of his father's generation. He is buying someone else's youth, which is, depending on your mood, either deeply human or slightly hilarious. The auction prices suggest it's mostly the first one. The expression on his face when he turns the key suggests the same. Now, here's the generation that draws the most commentary in parking lots, and sometimes not the kind the owner was hoping for. The C7, sold from 2014 to 2019, is by almost any technical measure the best front-engine Corvette ever built. The Z6 variant was a genuinely world-class performance machine. It embarrassed much more expensive cars on track. It was taken seriously by people who are professionally required to be skeptical. The automotive press, for once, ran out of caveats. And yet, the C7 buyer had something to prove. You could feel it. The C7 attracted a specific type of successful man mid-career, often in his late 40s or 50s. For him, the car was part of a larger argument he was making about himself. The argument went roughly like this: I worked hard, I earned this. And this car proves I am not the person you assume I am. The problem is that the person he was working so hard to not be was also, fairly often, buying a C7. There's a specific scenario that almost every C7 owner has lived at least once. He's at a gas station. A younger guy walks past, glances at the car, doesn't react, and keeps walking. And the C7 owner has to physically resist the urge to say something. He doesn't. He gets in. He pulls out of the lot. He drives considerably faster than necessary for the next 5 minutes. You already know this is true. Don't pretend you don't. Which brings us, finally, to the car that changed everything and refused to apologize for it. The C8, launched in 2020, moved the engine behind the driver's seat for the first time in Corvette history. This was not a minor update. The Corvette had been front-engine for its entire 67-year existence up to that point. Moving the engine was, in Corvette terms, roughly equivalent to rearranging the geography of a country. People had very strong opinions, mostly before they drove it. The C8 buyer tends to be slightly younger than his predecessors. He chose the Corvette deliberately not by default, not because he couldn't afford the alternative. He did the research and decided this was the right answer. He is, in many ways, the most self-aware Corvette buyer in the car's history. He knows exactly what he bought, he knows precisely why. And he is considerably less apologetic about it than any previous generation of Corvette owner. But here's the thing about the C8 buyer that deserves to be said carefully. The mid-engine layout that makes him feel sophisticated is the same layout he would have dismissed as unnecessary European complexity in 1998. The C8 buyer feels rational because the car finally matches his self-image. But that's not sophistication. That's just coincidence wearing a very nice jacket. And this, ultimately, is the single truth that every generation of Corvette has been quietly, patiently proving for 7 decades. People do not buy cars that fit their lives. They buy cars that fit the story they are telling about themselves. The C3 buyer needed to feel fast even when the numbers said otherwise. The C2 collector needs to feel young even when the mirror disagrees. The C5 buyer needed to feel smart about a decision that was almost entirely emotional. The C7 buyer needed to feel exceptional in a car that was, paradoxically everywhere. And the C8 buyer needs to feel evolved, sophisticated, deliberate, global in his taste, all while driving something that still has American muscle in every fiber of its identity. None of this is a criticism. It's the only way any of it makes sense. Because when you think about it, a car that turns accountants into dreamers and skeptics into loyal believers, a car that makes practical men leave gas stations considerably faster than they arrived. That car isn't just a car. It's a very effective mirror. And most of us, if we're being completely honest, don't really want to know what we look like in it. We just want to drive.